Right, nice to be here. Why are you guys so far away? Sweden, it's a long way to travel. Luckily I came a week ago, so I've had time to kind of get de-jet lagged. I don't know about you, but I tend to learn best from concrete examples. So that's what this is all about, give a concrete example of how one company works. It's interesting as I go to different places around the world and meet different Agile communities, the big question is always scaling. How do we scale? Like scaling. I like the phrase, don't scale Agile, descale your organization. Makes you think a bit, doesn't it? What is that? Descale an organization. Descale your project. Scaling and culture is the other one that keeps coming up. So I think Spotify is an interesting example of both. Another thing that I find interesting about Spotify is Spotify never went through an Agile transitioning because they kind of cheated. They were born into this around 2006. So kind of the Agile DNA was planted in from the very beginning. And what has that resulted in now when we're about 1,500 people? And I've been lucky to be able to be on pretty much most of that journey in one way or another. And it's been very, very interesting. So I'm going to basically tell you where we are now and some of our challenges. And just a little bit of context. How many of you use this product or have tried it? Just understand that's most. Okay, that's most, right? What it basically attempts to do is make these ways of listening to music obsolete, right? Bits of plastic, or the notion of buying and owning songs, or the notion of pirate copying, just trying to find a better way of doing that. What I find is interesting is it looks like it's just a music streaming product, but in fact the company is really trying to change the whole music industry, turn it upside down, and doing quite well with that so far. So from a product perspective, it's a very interesting story as well. Although in this talk I'm going to focus more on the kind of how we work as a company. It's been growing very fast. So we've like a lot of what we've been doing has been triggered by growth pain, right? No matter what we do, it tends to break after you double in size, and then it breaks again when you double in size again. So it gets kind of crazy. Now we've slowed down a little bit in our growth, but generally most of what we do is oriented around how do we deal with all these people, right? Right now, here's how it looks like. Most people in Stockholm, mainly because that's where the company was born, but we got development spread across about 5 cities. US and Sweden. And one interesting thing in our journey was we were pretty much a Scrum company for at least a couple of years, I would say. Everything was Scrum everywhere. And what we found was that was great kind of to create some semblance of order in a chaos. But then after a while we started noticing that some of this shoe level, like specific Scrum practices were actually getting a little bit in the way. So we decided to relax a little bit on the practices and instead focus on the principles. So instead of having Scrum teams that always do sprints, we said, how about we're Agile teams, we call them squads, that do whatever flavor of Agile they like. They may or may not do sprints, etc. And as part of that, we renamed the Scrum Master role to Agile Coach, because we want somebody who doesn't sound like a master, because that kind of implies that there are slaves. And instead, we want to emphasize the servant leadership part, so we wanted to use the word coach instead. So in effect, it's a similar type of role, but we just call it Agile Coach, and we don't prescribe sprints specifically, right? So what is this thing called a squad? It is really the equivalent of a Scrum team that doesn't necessarily do sprints, right? So yes, end-to-end responsibility, cross-functional, self-organizing, pretty much your canonical Scrum team. They all own some aspect of the product, such as search or playlists management, very, very end-to-end, very vertical. Some of them are internally facing, some of them build tools for other squads, etc. But the big thing, the big driving force is what we call autonomy, which is interesting because that's kind of built into Scrum, so it's no coincidence. But we use autonomy to guide the whole evolution of the company pretty much. And autonomy to us means not only deciding how we do our work, but also deciding what are we going to work on next as a team. And the reason why that matters so much to us is because we've found that this enables us to move fast, because squads don't have to get stuck waiting for a decision. Right? They can always move somewhere. And it helps us scale, because we don't need as much, if squads are fundamentally self-directing, we don't need as much central functions. So yes, we do have managers, yes, we have coordination roles and things like that, but not as much as you otherwise would need when being this many people. And it's fun, it's motivating. And maybe that's the most important. So I have this little formula that I use. It's very unscientific. I discovered just like a month ago that I've been using this formula in my head unconsciously. productivity equals, right? You ready for this? Got your notepads, right? You get calculators, right? You can do this math. Effort, because you actually got to put in some work. Sorry, but you have to work to get stuff done. Times competence, because you kind of got to know a little bit about what you're doing. And environment, the team needs access to tools and support, things like that. And guess what? It's not enough, right? What's the last one? Hint, I told it to you 2 minutes ago.
Motivation.
Yeah, motivation. Because if you have all these 3 things, but you don't have that one, then yeah, sorry. Not much is going to happen. You're not going to get great products, at least. So that's why that one's squared. This is the formula. Got it? Okay? You can go ahead and apply it. So this is what matters the most. If you have a very highly motivated team, like these guys who are hell-bent on solving a problem they're struggling with right now, but they really want to solve it, they'll fix the environment. They'll get a hold of the competence they need. They'll put in the hours they need. They'll solve it if they're motivated. And if they're not, then the other stuff doesn't really help. So we really focus a lot on anything that will raise the motivation of the team. Right, but we still have this problem. Okay, so 70 squads. How do we make sure they're not just all running in different directions, right? That's where alignment comes in. And I used to think of it like a trade-off scale. Like you have to take your pick. Where do I want to be along this scale? Do I want to be on that side, which is manager decides what people do, right? Do what I say, right? Or do I want to be closer to that side, which is the teams decide and the manager says do whatever, and the teams just decide, right? And you have to pick. But I found that this is actually false dichotomy, and it's more useful to think of it as 2 dimensions, right? And don't worry, this is the only, consultant type 2x2 I'm going to put up on this presentation. But this one actually is quite useful. And as you know, all 2x2s have a good corner and 3 bad corners, right? So we'll start in one of the bad corners. Low alignment, low autonomy. That means people don't know why they're going to work other than getting their salary, right? You go to work and just do what the manager says and don't ask too many questions, right? So yeah, that's a kind of micromanagement culture. Not fun. High alignment, low autonomy means the managers actually are good at, painting the big picture, describing what's the purpose of what we're doing. So yeah, we need to cross this river because of whatever, right? But they're also telling people how to solve it. So we need to cross this river, so build a bridge. Right? High alignment, still low autonomy, a little bit better. But this is the good corner, okay? This is the good corner, at least the corner we like. High alignment, high autonomy is the managers, the leaders are good at describing the problem that needs to be solved. We need to cross the river. But they're also letting the teams figure out how to do it. They're not telling the teams how to do it. We need to cross the river, figure out how. So for example, what are some other ways of getting across this river? Right? A bike? Does someone say a bike? No? Yeah. I haven't had my morning coffee yet, right? Yeah, there's lots of ways, right? You can swim, you can build a tunnel, you can do a ferry, you can reroute the river, you can move the village to both the same side of the river, or I don't know, right? Lots of crazy ideas. So let people figure out the best solution. Now you get innovation, now you get collaboration, you get all kinds of good stuff. And down on the right side, we have this another not so good corner, which is low alignment, high autonomy. That's the kind of 70 mini startups all running in different directions, and managers are like, I hope someone is working on the river problem, but I have no idea, right? So what we find is that high alignment enables high autonomy. If you're good at alignment, if you're good at really painting this inspiring vision of where we're going and why it's important to this company, you don't need to control people as much. They'll tend to autonomously help you get there, right? Different teams will do different things, but they're all aligned towards the same goal. Does that make sense? It's a very powerful concept, the idea that high alignment enables high autonomy. It doesn't conflict with autonomy. So this means that in practice, the leader's job, this is the CEO, Daniel Lake, is to explain what problem needs to be solved and why at a high level. And then the squad's job is to collaborate with each other to find the best solution. This is also an anti-siloing strategy, right? If squads see some bigger picture, they're going to be less likely to optimize just for their own spot, which is otherwise known as sub-optimizing, right? And the office is physically optimized to kind of invite cross-squad collaboration. So there's lots of inviting, couches and spots between the squads where you can just go sit down and chat with somebody. So you don't really need to go and book a meeting and find a room and things like that. There's of course a bit of that, but lots of informal spaces helps a lot. So in general, although you do need some kind of structure in a bigger organization, we find that what really matters is community. So I'll talk more about that in a moment. But first, a little bit about the structure we do have. Some of you have probably read some of the articles and videos I've been putting up on this. I'm not really sure why we make up these weird words. There's probably some good reason for it, but I forget what that reason was. But we call a tribe is a bucket of squads that have some kind of shared purpose and sit near each other. So for example, a tribe over here, they focus on the music playing experience itself. How do we make a good music player? Well, that tribe over there, they make infrastructure for other squads, etc. So we got about, what, I think it's 7 or 8 or 9 tribes now. And inside each tribe, if you zoom in, you find a matrix. Right? Matrix models are very old. They've been around for a long time. What's a little bit different about this one is it's a matrix that's focused very much on delivery. So the primary dimension is the squad, which is the vertical. That's how people sit physically grouped together with their product owner. So a squad typically includes a product owner, a back-end developer, front-end developer, a designer, a QA, which is quality assistance, and TA, which is test automation, agile coach. So very, very wide, depending on what to do, of course. A chapter is the horizontal dimension. That's the secondary dimension. That's competency areas. So we could have a back-end chapter. All the back-end developers are in the same chapter. And here's a front-end chapter, and there's an agile coach chapter. So they communicate along that dimension. That's mostly about personal growth and about developing my competency within that area. So yeah, each tribe is this little matrix thing. And sometimes we want to communicate across the whole company on some items, on some areas, such as quality or leadership or whatnot. So we have this notion of a guild, which is a lightweight community of interest. For example, the leadership guild, anybody interested in leadership, it doesn't matter what role you have, you're interested in this topic, you can join that guild, and we'll have conferences like this, and we'll have mailing lists and stuff like that. So these are the kind of this is the glossary of terms we use when talking about organization. But we're not very, very strict about it. I guess the main, first order thing here is squads, right? Squads are very much real. Like you sit with your squad, that's your day-to-day work. Everything else, tribes, chapters, guilds, are a little bit secondary. It's the squad, which is the primary thing. And reality is messy. It's not as nice and pretty as it looks like in a slide, right? So here's a real version. I asked a tribe lead, this was quite a long time ago, I asked him, so how does your tribe actually look like right now? And he took out a piece of paper and he did from his head, he just drew this picture. And as you can see, it's not a whole lot of straight lines, right? It's not symmetrical. And it changes quite fast. And that's okay. We don't try to make this too stable. Instead, we allow things to change. Because basic idea is if you need to talk to somebody about something to solve a problem, just go do it. It doesn't matter what chapter or squad different people are in. Just go talk to the people you need to talk to. And if we notice that a lot of people need to talk to each other very often, then maybe that group should be a squad. So we form a squad out of that, right? So yeah, we try to form the organization based on what communication needs to happen and not vice versa, right? One kind of key thing to make this whole thing work is small frequent releases. And here's a problem that I see in many companies, especially large companies, when you have long release cycles. Let's say this is half a year, right? When you have long release cycle, then each release is like a project, right? Release is drama. It's something scary. You need like roles, and you need maybe a release manager and documents and artifacts and meetings and stuff, right? Because it's scary, and when things go wrong, they tend to, well, first of all, they're likely to go wrong because half a year, a lot of stuff happens in half a year, right? And now it's all got to come together. Plus, when things go wrong, it takes time to fix, and there's risk involved, etc. So this is the equivalent of if you had a train station and the train leaves every hour. Now you want to make sure you arrive in time, you want to check the time schedule, and it becomes a bit of a project to get on the right train. And if you miss it, you get very frustrated. But if the train leaves very often, then you don't need to look at the time schedule, right? You just go. And the train's there, you get on it. If you miss it, you get on the next one, right? It's not a big deal. But anyway, yeah, so big release cycles tend to cause trouble. And there's a vicious cycle here too. And this is the kind of the kicker, because if you release seldom, the release is big, right? Because a lot of stuff happens. And if the release is big, it tends to be hard. And if the release is hard, we're going to tend to not want to release too often, right? Oops. Yeah, does anybody recognize this? Hand up if you feel like this is kind of us. We're in this vicious cycle, yeah? It's okay, you're among friends here, right? We won't tell anyone, it's okay. Right? It's hard to get out of. But once you do get out of it, it's very nice, because then you get this other, everything becomes opposite. Release is routine, release is boring, right? We don't talk about how we release because it happens all the time. It's just mostly automated. Release often means the release is small, because if we release every week, what's happened since last week? Not a whole lot. So if things go wrong, we can probably fix it. And if we can't, we can just roll back. It's not a big deal, right? So it takes a lot of effort to get from the top one to the bottom. But once you're down at the bottom one, it's quite easy to stay inside it because, yeah, release is simple, so you can keep releasing often, right? So we put a lot of effort into this. And here's an example of when things started going south for a while. As we grew, it became harder and harder to release the actual client, the actual core product, the music player itself on the desktop. It's interesting, Spotify, we try to maintain this illusion to the users that this is just a music player, but actually behind it's like this complete ecosystem for music, almost like a global operating system for music. But from the customer view, it's just a music streaming product, right? So getting this thing out the door started getting more and more complicated as we had more and more people involved. Everybody was spraying in code, right? And what's the chance that this thing is stable at any given moment in time? Well, 0, right? There's always somebody working on something. So it got really hard. But what I really liked was, and this is where culture comes in, instead of saying, okay, release is hard, we better add lots of roles and structure and process around it, instead, let's make release not hard, right? What's making release hard? Let's change the underlying reasons for why this is hard. Well, it's because of architecture. So we changed architecture. And now it's more like we use something called Chromium Embedded Framework, which basically means this product is actually like a web browser. It just doesn't look like one. So each part is like a frame, and squads can put their own stuff into production without having to synchronize with neighbor squads. Really nice. They can just release as often as they like. Sometimes we need to release the whole container itself. But things got a lot simpler. And this is the past, say, 1.5 years, we've put a lot of effort into this notion of taking it even further, and we've tried to implement this thing called continuous delivery. And I'll see a lot of teams around the world on the same path, right? And the basic idea behind continuous delivery, for those who aren't familiar, is that every commit is a release candidate. Every time someone commits, you get a new release candidate. That's the vision, right? It doesn't mean you're going to release everything, but it means that you can. It's just a business decision, not a technical decision. And the guiding question is how long does it take to deploy a change that just involves one single line of code? If you ask yourself that question, and the answer ideally should be just minutes, then you're getting close, right? If it's hours or days or weeks or months or years, then you've got some work to do, right? And can we do this on a repeatable, reliable basis, right? Once again, this is about making release routine rather than making release drama. So when teams manage to do this, their reality looks something like this. I push some code, and lots of stuff starts happening automatically while I keep working or go have some coffee. It gets built automatically, tested and integrated. It gets deployed to a production-like environment, all automatically. Then we got a new release candidate sitting right there, right? And I can do manual test on it. So we want to automate as much test as possible, but you can't automate all testing. So whatever's left is manual testing. And so yeah, now I can go do some manual testing, and if I'm happy with this, I can put it into production, which is just one click. Right? That's the vision. We're far from this today. We have some squads that have done really well and some that are way behind, but this is what we're focusing on all the time. And it's driving a lot of organizational change, architectural change, tools, etc. But I'll just give an example of one squad actually has nailed this really nicely. And their vision is kind of like, deployment should be so easy that even an agile coach can do it, right? And I think they managed, because here's what he built. Look at that. There's just a little joystick and a button. That's all. So let's put something into production. Let's deploy the metadata service. Right? Let's put that in production. Where do we put it? Production or shared environment? Let's put it in shared environment. There, right? And which version do we want to deploy? The latest one or that one over there? Am I feeling lucky? Yeah? All right. Let's go. Right. It's going, and done. There. I like that. Turn it into game, right? Yeah. So, of course, there are some things that we don't want to release too often. For example, inside here is a Spotify client, and every time that gets updated, I get it tells me there's a new version of Spotify, and that's a bit annoying, right? If that happens every, say, 5 minutes, right? So, like I'm in the middle of playing a song, and it's like a new version has come. Oh, cool, okay, updated. And then, one song later, a new version has come. Like, what the hell? So yeah, we need to do a bit of batching there. And so we settled on release train frequency and decided on 3 weeks. Now I think we're shrinking it to 2 weeks. And the idea there is just like I told you about the train metaphor. The train leaves every 5 minutes, right? In this case, the train leaves every 3 weeks. And the train always leaves. So whoever's on the train gets to go. Whoever missed the train gets to take the next train. There's no waiting, right? So suppose we have 3 squads here that are all building stuff that's going to impact this client, right? Feature A is done, feature B is not done, feature B is done, feature C is done, but it's always going to be something that's in progress, right? So feature D is in progress. What happens with that one? Well, it actually gets released as well. So everything gets released, even the stuff that's not finished. And all the squad members know that, so they're kind of careful about how they commit things, and they hide things behind feature flags. That means that in practice, there's lots of unfinished features inside this client right now, but they're hidden from me using feature flags. So I can actually go in and turn on and off features, and you can do that centrally as well, and turn on and off features for certain population groups, etc. It's a great tool to make sure that we're releasing often rather than letting code sit around on branches, right? But it's also a useful testing tool in general. Like, what happens if I turn this off? How will people react, right? So feature flags and release trains is very powerful. So we experiment a little bit with how long the release trains are. We don't need release trains for everything, but it certainly helps to make sure that stuff is always going out the door, right? One thing we learned also was that even though there's a release going out every 3 weeks on, for example, Android, we do want feedback faster than that. So just recently, we finally finished this really nice thing, which is a nightly build. For mobile, it's harder to do the nightly build thing. On a web thing, it's easier. But they actually managed to crack it using various tools. So what happens now is I have 2 versions of Spotify on my phone. I have the Spotify internal, and then to the right, you see it looks like a moon, right? Like a moon with Spotify. So that one is updated every night automatically. It just automatically gets a new version downloads on my phone. So right now, I pick it up and I can run the latest code, which is very useful because that means that as a developer, when I commit code, I know that by tomorrow there's 1,500 Spotify employees that are actually using my code in their actual music listening habits. So if something is broken, I'm going to find out, right? I'm going to find out. So yeah, anything you can do to release more often and get early feedback is worth a lot. But it takes time. It's a lot of work, right? You need people and teams dedicated to infrastructure and automation, things like that. One cultural principle that has turned out to be very powerful for us is the idea of a self-service model. And what that basically means is no handoffs, right? You don't hand off something to someone else. You take responsibility all the way yourself. Others may support you, but you can't, hand the stick over to someone else. And this principle has caused us to end up with pretty much 3 flavors of squads. We have feature squads that are, like, say the one on the top left, they're the search squad, right? They build search features. They do that on all platforms. They own that thing all the way to deployment on all platforms and maintenance and operations. They press the release button, and they're the ones who get woken up in the middle of the night if things break with search, etc. So they really own this thing, kind of like a mini startup. But to make that feasible, because it's almost impossible to have a squad that has enough breadth of skills to be able to fiddle around with iOS and Android and web and desktop and various APIs, you'd have like a 30-person squad, right? So to make that feasible, we've evolved this notion of client app squads, where each client app squad owns some platform. So we have the iOS squad, the Android squad, etc. And so the iOS squad, their job isn't to put your stuff in production on the iPhone, right? Their job is to enable you to do that yourself. But they platformize that. It's like they pave the road. They build the road that you as a feature squad can drive on to get your stuff into production. Does that make sense? Right? So they platformize that. So that way this feature squad can put code into production on the iPhone without having to muck about with too much plumbing on the iPhone or iOS. And we also have other infrastructure squads that build things like monitoring services, continuous delivery tools, and squads that work with more operations-like things, right? But once again, they don't put stuff into production for you. You do it yourself. They enable you to do it yourself. So I like the metaphor of a buffet, right? If you're going to have, if I were to serve you all lunch, right? The most scalable way to do that is not to have a bunch of waiters going to your tables and taking orders, right? But you need a lot of people, a lot of coordination. Instead, the most scalable way is just to put up a big buffet table and have you come and serve yourselves, right? But that's based on trust. That only works if I trust you to not misuse that, right? I'm trusting you not to come up and just take the best parts and put it in your backpack and go home, right? Yeah. So yeah, self-service model is a fundamentally good trick for scaling, but it is based on trust. Generally speaking, I find that trust is more powerful than control. In fact, you indirectly get control through trust, which is interesting. I like this example. I'm not an expert on traffic systems, but I've read up a little bit on this particular thing about different ways of designing crossings. Very interesting. Turns out that this is a 4-way crossing with traffic lights, right? Signaling system. This is a roundabout. In the traffic signals version, it's central control, right? The lights determine who gets to go. So if there's an accident, you're more likely to know whose fault it was, right? Who ran the light, right? And there's very clear rules. In the roundabout, it's based on trust and self-organization. You need to open your eyes. You need to look around, right? There's no lights telling you when to go, when to stop. There's some basic principles, but that's it. So this works because we have the shared goal of surviving this crossing and getting to the other side, right? Everybody wants people to be able to get through, right? Nobody wants this to just get blocked. And if people start crashing, that's lose-lose. So to the left, we got 32 conflict points, which to me reads as 32 ways things can go wrong, right? To the right, we have just 8 conflict points. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it sounds like more is bad, right? And research indicates you get faster flow in roundabouts in most cases. You get significantly faster flow through this. And you get a lot fewer accidents. There are probably cases where it makes sense to build crossings, but it seems like in general we tend to build crossings too often when we should be building roundabouts. Crossings give this false sense of control, right? This false security that, hey, we're in control, but actually it makes things worse in general. Roundabouts, yeah, you have to trust people. So yeah, here's a famous race car driver, Mario Andretti. If everything's under control, you're going too slow. And that's a useful one. If you think about it, right? If you think of a really big complex project, and if you want control as a project manager, how can you get control? You ask everybody to do nothing, right? Ask everybody to stay home in bed and don't touch a phone or a computer. Now you're in control, right? Now you're in perfect control. And as soon as anybody does anything, now you're starting to lose control, right? So this notion of taking control is a little bit, counterproductive, right? So here's what I want to really coach managers in an agile organization is trust and support people. Don't try to control them. Assume that people want to act in the best interest of the company. I know it's hard, right? Assume that people want to act in the best interest of the company. And guess what? The chance that they will increases in that case. It's a bit of a self-fulfilling because people tend to want to live up to the trust they get. But in order to act in the best interest of the company, people need some support, and that is autonomy. They need to actually be able to act at all, right, without asking for permission. They need transparency. That's where the whole Scrum values come in, with inspect and adapt and transparency. They need to be able to see what's going on, right? What are we doing? What's the vision? Where are we going? What do the customers think of my latest release? You need a whole lot of transparency around priorities and things like that. And you need a short feedback loop, because as this team does things, they need to find out if whatever they're doing is the right thing or the wrong thing. They need a way of finding out. So releasing often is one way of doing that. Promoting face-to-face conversation is another way. Anything you can do to shorten that feedback loop. These are the management actions in an agile company. It's not controlling people. It is putting in place these things so that self-organization works. You are enabling self-organization. Right? So manage for the normal. Treat exceptions as exceptional. Yes, there will be some people who aren't acting in the best interest of the company. There are going to be bozos sometimes, right? But treat those as exceptions. Treat those on a case-by-case basis. Don't organize a company based on those people. Right? So what I notice companies like this, the mindset of management is less around what are you doing, when are you going to be done. The types of things they talk about are more like what do you need, what support do you need, how can I help you. Right? It's kind of servant leadership in a nutshell. Right? So this seems to be embedded inside the culture at Spotify. This is what they consider obvious. If I were to show this slide, they'd be like, why are you saying this? This is duh, this is obvious, right? Of course, people screw up sometimes. People make mistakes. And you need to let people do that, because if people are punished for making mistakes, guess what's going to happen? Yeah, people are going to hide the mistakes next time, right? They're going to hide them. And that's not good, right? So you want mistakes to be visible, and therefore you need to accept that people make mistakes. So here's a good quote from Daniel Ek, the CEO of Spotify, founder. We aim to make mistakes faster than anyone else. It's like, that's interesting. But he really means that, and he says it quite often. And what that means is people are going to make mistakes anyway because we're humans, right? Darn, we're humans, make mistakes. So let's get it over with. Just make the mistakes. If we're going to make mistakes anyway, let's make them fast so we can learn fast and improve fast. So in practice, what this means is we need to focus more on failure recovery than failure avoidance. And here's another useful metaphor for anyone who has kids, right? Who has kids here? Yeah, that's most of you. Well, this community is growing up, right? I have 4 small kids. And here's the thing. If you want to keep your kids safe, yeah, lock them into the crib, right? It's safe, right? So my kids are between the age of 4 and 11, and they're still in the crib. They're very safe. Nothing's happened. Just kidding. Yeah, this is how you keep your kids safe, but the kid won't learn very fast, won't develop very fast, won't be very happy, right? Let the baby run around, and guess what happens? Well, they fall over sometimes, they get hurt, right? But this kid is going to be happier, the kid is going to learn faster, it's going to develop faster, and, you know, babies heal fast, right? They heal pretty fast. Just got to make sure that it's not lethal, right? So evidence of this inside cultures like Spotify and other companies that have this failure-friendly culture, you see things like, this is our internal blog. People are putting up their failure stories, right? They're displaying them proudly. Here's exactly how we shot ourselves in the foot, right? And what we learned from it. And things like the fail wall, right? People put up sticky notes for failures, like, hey, look, I screwed up this thing yesterday, and here's what I learned, right? So failure is considered, yeah, something you display proudly, right? But of course, we don't want to just let it pass. We want to pick up the learnings as well. Otherwise, we'll just fail again. So we want to learn from failures. How to do that? Well, using standard agile techniques like retrospectives, but also at a little bit higher level. If something goes wrong, we want to do a post-mortem. Something went wrong, a crash happens. We get all the people who know anything about it into a room and talk about, so what happened and what did we learn? What we don't talk about is whose fault it was. Because again, if you start looking at, I think it was his fault, right? Then, yeah, people are going to start hiding their failures, right? So we don't care whose fault it was. We care about what did we learn, what happened, what did we learn, what will we change. So this is very much a cultural thing. All over the place, there is retrospectives and postmortems and various things like that happening. Often guided by the coaches. So we have about 30 or 25 or so agile coaches. What they bring to the table is these skills, right? Skills such as, well, how Scrum works, but also other agile methods, and how to run a retrospective, things like that. All these little coaching voodoo things, right? Another thing about failure is it has to be non-lethal. So our architecture is optimized around something we call limited blast radius, which means if something's going to blow up, it's hopefully not going to blow up the whole system. So behind the scenes, it's actually about, I think we're up to about 300 different systems that are fairly autonomous, running separately. The chance that you're going to bring them all down is quite small, unless you really screw up, right? It does happen, but very rarely. Instead, when you screw up, normally it just impacts one part of the system. For example, why is the album art is looking kind of wacky right now? Well, or maybe this little notification thing up there is not showing up, for example. So normally it's, the blast radius is limited. And since whenever we do something a little bit scary, we roll out just to like 1% of all users. That's still like 200,000 people, but it's still just 1%, right? So if we screw up, it's not going to screw up for everybody. And the effect of this is that when a squad makes a mistake, which happens from time to time, it's normally only going to impact a small number of users and only a small part of the product, and only for a short period of time. Because of the no handoffs principle, right? We own this feature. If it breaks, that's embarrassing for us. There's nobody else to blame. It's our problem. We have to fix it, right? It's embarrassing. So things tend to get fixed quite quickly. And what's interesting about this, it's a bit counterintuitive, because it might look like, wait a sec, you're letting people make mistakes in production. Doesn't that make the quality worse? But I find that, no, it makes the quality better, because now squads can learn faster. They can try things out and get faster feedback. So they can improve the product more quickly. And as a result, we have a product today that is viral. Most people love it, and they tell their friends about it, and it spreads very quickly. And yeah, there'll be a bug here and there sometimes, but most people don't even notice it. It gets fixed quite quickly, and then we move on, right? In contrast, if we were very paranoid about bugs in the beginning, we'd probably have a product that was, maybe 0 bugs today, but it'd be a pretty bad product with 0 bugs, right? And it's not, we wouldn't win this match by just having the least bugs. In general, it seems to be more about the winner in a very competitive industry like this is the fastest learner. So that's our strategy. Make mistakes faster than anybody else, right? When it comes to building the actual product, we're very inspired by this notion of lean startup. There's going to be at least one talk today on that. Right? We have our own twist on it. We call it think it, build it, ship it, tweak it, which is like our framework. For small things, just build and release, right? Squads just put stuff into production. We don't add too much process. But when there's something bigger that's going to imply forming new squads and maybe hiring people, then we need to be a bit more careful. So then we have this notion of a think it phase. That's when we formulate the problem. What problem are we trying to solve, right? So let's say the problem is people who don't know what to listen to can't use our product because you have to type the name of exactly what you want to listen to, right? So people who just want to wash the dishes, they just want some background music, how are they going to use our product? So we verify that that's a problem using research. So we have user researchers that talk to real users, do focus groups, etc., to verify that this actually is a problem. It's not just something we think is a problem. That's part of it. The other part of it is defining a press release. So write the press release before. Like if this product was done today, how would the press release look like? We call that the narrative. What's the story? How would we show off this product? If we can't come up with a compelling narrative, then don't build the product, right? And then metrics. How will we know it succeeded? How do we know that if this product was done today, how would we know that it was a success or a failure? So if we look at things like monthly active users, daily active users, various forms of engagement, how much music do people listen to, how much do they share, a lot of stuff can be measured. And we look at, so if this product was done, what do we think will happen? And we set up a hypothesis for that that's measurable, right? Which is quite a typical lean startup technique. And then build a bunch of prototypes, lo-fi prototypes, paper prototypes, mock-ups, etc., to get a sense of what this might look like when it's done. So this is our think it phase, right? Where we're trying to figure out the constraints of this thing we're building. It's not a requirement spec, there's no lists of features, there's no promised dates, it's not that, it's just understanding the problem, right? And then once we feel that this is actually worth building, right? Then typically the people who did the think it work will also build it. The same squad will typically just continue. Again, try not to have handoffs, right? So what they do now is they work typically in sprints or something like that, and they iteratively build the MVP, the minimum viable product, which to us kind of maps to the minimum lovable product, right? The smallest thing we can put in production without feeling very embarrassed. You might say it's narrative complete, not feature complete. So something we can put in production that will fulfill the promise of radio you can save. But yeah, there's still lots of stuff to do. And so we put that into production for just a few % of users. The squad makes that call themselves, they put it out, and they start measuring and comparing, right? So they have these dashboards, and they look at, how are these 1% acting compared to these other 99%? And based on what they see, they'll start tweaking the feature. Maybe the feature isn't performing as well as they were hoping. So they start tweaking and they release again, and they're releasing over and over and over again, sometimes several times per day, and looking at the data to find ways to achieve the desired impact. So it's all about the impact and not the output, right? It's all about impact. And at the same time, they're sorting out operational things like, how much load is this on the server? Do we need more memory, or do we need to optimize something? So they're learning both how to build the right product, but also how to build the product right? And then they gradually roll out to more and more people. And finally, when it's all fully rolled out, yeah, that's ship it. So ship it starts when the 1% have the product, and it ends when 100% of the world has the product. Okay, then what? Oh, then we're in tweak it, right? The product is released to everybody in the world, but it's by no means done. We can still keep improving it. So the squad will keep owning it, keep tweaking it, keep improving it until it gets shut down pretty much. So this is our high-level process. We're not very strict about it. We don't have like strict roles and handoffs and toll gates, but this is the kind of mindset. Any given major initiative we have, we can pretty much point and say, this one is in build it, this one is in think it, right? This one is in tweak it. So we're experimenting with various forms of portfolio-level dashboards to visualize this. So the general mindset is maximize value and not output. So think of this person loading rocks, right? We're not trying to load as many rocks as possible. That's not the goal. The goal is to slow down a little bit and look at what are we loading. Some of these are bricks and some are gold, right? So don't just try to load as much as possible. Load the good stuff, right? We get less stuff loaded maybe, but we get better stuff loaded. And that's what's going to win at the end of the day. One of the things about that industry, since Spotify kind of created a new industry, this music streaming industry, managed to convince labels and artists that it's a good idea to actually let people stream your music and there's a way to earn money from it. We noticed that industry is all about innovation, and then the competitors are companies like Google and Apple and like 100 different startups. So it's heating up, right? And basically, we think innovation is the thing, is the key, and not predictability. And these stand at odds to each other, because if you want 100% predictability, the only way to do that is if you do something you've done before, exactly, right? Only then do you have predictability. If you're doing innovation, that means you're by definition exploring new territory. So predictability has to be sacrificed to some extent. So on this scale, yeah, sometimes we're on that side a little bit because we have a partner integration project or something and there's a deadline involved. Then we do things like standard Scrum release planning techniques, right? Things like burn-up charts and velocity. But that's really the exception. The norm is more like we're on that side, focusing more on letting people experiment and innovate and not caring too much about plan fulfillment, right? So one example of this is something that we call Spotify Hack Week, twice per year. We had one just a couple of weeks ago. This is really interesting. it's a whole week of everybody gets to do whatever the hell they want, right? A lot of different companies have different variants of this, but this is our variant. It's a whole week of build whatever with whoever in whatever way you want. Originally it was just the tech people, but now it's actually the whole company. So it's even sales and marketing and everybody, right? And yeah, hack the product, hack the company, hack the office, hack the process, hack yourself, hack your desk, hack stuff, right? And it's amazing. It really blows us away every time what the amount of creativity people have. And there's a big demo and a party on Friday, and we look at what came out of this. Sometimes there are like really useful new products come out. Some are even ready for production in just that 1 week, which is like, whoa. Some are more like a proof of concept, and they later on spawn into actual real projects. And some are just crazy ideas that we don't know if they're going to turn into something or not, such as this one.
See you in a bit.
Yeah. It's really fun. Imagine that times 100. You get 100 crazy things. It's like, whoa. But maybe one of the most important things is new connections. People who don't normally work together will start working together. So you build new connections across the company. Really interesting. Plus, it also reinforces the message that, listen, everybody, we're here to innovate, right? We're here to try things out. And the Hack Week kind of is a demonstration of that. Since we are big on innovation, a lot of what we do is based on experiments and not so much on arguments, because you can sit and argue about whether should we do it this way or that way, and you can argue it to death and you still don't know who's right. So it's better to just try it out. So generally, our cultural default is to, instead of arguing too long about A or B, just try both and compare, right? Sometimes it's about the product. Should we organize the layout like that or like that? We'll do both. We'll A/B test. Sometimes it's about do we need sprint planning meetings or not? I don't know. Let's try a month without sprint planning meetings and a month with, and then see what it was like. And so that means, by definition, we allow things to vary from place to place. So some squads are doing very much Scrum by the book, and some are doing more like Kanban-like. Some are doing I don't know what. Right? It varies. But what this does, it gives us more decisions that are data-driven. Not all decisions, but it gives us more decisions that are data-driven and less decisions that are more like ego-driven or opinion-driven or authority-driven, right? I don't know who came up with that term, hippo, the highest paid person in the room. The highest paid person's opinion, the hippo, right? The hippo makes the decisions. Yeah, we normally don't do that, right? So you hear in the hallway conversations, you hear quite a lot of things like, what's the hypothesis? People are talking about that. Or they talk about things like, what did we learn, right? What does the data say? Or what are we going to try next? But a really important thing for this to work in practice is you also need a waste repellent culture, because as you try lots of things, some will inevitably not work, right? You can't keep the things that don't work, right? Because you get into mess. So what I really like is that they're very waste repellent. If they try something and it didn't work, they'll throw it away, without remorse, without blame. Just, okay, we tried this thing, it didn't work, let's stop doing it. So if it works, keep it, otherwise dump it. And so some things that have turned out to be keepers are retrospectives. Great stuff. Daily stand-ups and Scrum boards and things like that. Very big on that. Not because we standardize on it, but because people have tried it long enough and we realize that this actually works. Google Drive for document sharing, a Git for version control, and what we call Guild on Conferences, which is like an open space-like thing for guilds. These are just some examples. And things that are more like skip/dump, or time reports, handoffs of any kind, separate test teams or test phases, task estimates, estimating at the task level. I don't think any squads do that anymore. Any meetings that are perceived as useless for whatever reason, right? Very quick to just stop doing them. As part of this, we try to reinforce the message that there is no right or wrong. It's just trade-offs for the most part. So we have a too big team. Okay, if we have too big team, we might split it. But if we go overboard with splitting, we suddenly have too many teams, right? And that's another category of problems. Too top-down or too bottom-up. Pick your poison, right? Too short planning horizon, too long planning horizon. If you don't like a deep hierarchy, maybe you're like, okay, let's make a flatter hierarchy. But now I have too many direct reports as a manager. Darn, right? So, one problem gives birth to the next, or solving one problem will give birth to the next problem. Too much standardization, too much variation, or too fast change versus too slow change. In general, I find that it's not really possible to find the right spot to be at. But it is possible to get a sense of, are we too far to the right or too far to the left? What are the symptoms of being too far here or too far there? And which symptoms are we seeing most of? And as a result, you might conclude that, okay, we have too much variation. We should do a little bit more standardization, right? For example. Now, I know that if you read my articles or talks about this, it might come across as Spotify is some kind of agile nirvana where everything just works, and that's just not true. We have a bunch of problems and are always struggling with things. And I could give you a long list, but due to lack of time, I won't give you the specifics. But generally, there's a lot of pain, a lot of challenges all the time, and most are related to growth pain. But the interesting thing is I find that quite often when this is kind of my job to be looking for these things and help them sort it out. Quite often when I'm tracking the root cause of a problem and I turn the corner and I find out that there's people working on it already. That happens in most cases. Somebody already working on that problem and making pretty good progress as well. So what I find is that, healthy culture heals broken process. Process breaks into the left and right, but generally speaking, problems are seldom long-lived. They normally get fixed by somebody. I think that's because of the culture. There's this culture of, if there's a problem, let's fix it. Let's not whine about it. Let's just go talk to the people that we need to talk to and fix it, right? And if maybe today's solution causes new problems next year, then okay, then we'll fix it again in a different way, right? We find ourselves always trying to straddle this balance between chaos and bureaucracy. So as the company has been growing, get more and more people, we risk chaos, right? Absolute chaos. So we need to add a little bit of structure to compensate for that. But if we go overboard with structure and process and roles, then we're suddenly on this other side, which is, stuck on those spikes there, bureaucracy. And it turns out that my experience is it's easier to fix chaos than to fix bureaucracy. If you have too much chaos, it's easier to add a little bit of structure to fix that. If you're stuck in bureaucracy, it's harder. It's harder to remove things, right? So that's why this guy up there, you see, he's leaning to the left, right? Prefers, if I have to fall down somewhere, I'd fall down to the left preferably and then climb up again, right? Fall down to the right and I'm stuck, right? So the question is, what's the minimum viable bureaucracy? That's kind of the guiding question, right? The minimum viable, the MVB, right? Remember, you heard it from me first? What's the MVB? When I go to some big companies, they like that phrase, and it started triggering a whole series of workshops around, what is our minimum viable bureaucracy, right? So evaluating that, and it's interesting. So the engine behind this is, of course, continuous improvement, right? All the stuff I've been talking about, it's not really something we designed, we've evolved into it, right? It matches our context. Some of that stuff here might match your context, some might not. What do I know? But the engine behind this is, of course, continuous improvement. And the ways of doing that is very simple and typical techniques, like visualizing impediments, right? So as I walk around the hallways, I see a lot of boards like this. What are the top 3 impediments for this squad, for this project, for this whatever? And what are we actually doing about it? Or fancier boards with to do, doing, done, and there's all kinds of boards that pretty much amount to this, right? What problems are we trying to solve? And I really like this concept, definition of awesome. We're using that more and more often. It's basically like a squad sits down and talks about, in a perfect world, what would that be like for this squad? What is our definition of awesome? Or for this tribe or this project, what does awesome look like? In this case, don't break shit in production. Having complete set of skills in the squad, really finishing stuff, right? A lot of, this is not their reality, right? This is their vision. They may or may not ever get there, but it helps them decide, which direction they want to move in. The basic thinking there is if you can't agree on what awesome looks like, you're going to be less likely to get there, right? So start by defining what it is. Here's our definition of awesome architecture, which we did a couple of years ago, which was I can build, test, and ship my feature within a week. And I use data to learn from it, and my improved version is live week 2. That would be really cool. Is it realistic? I don't know. It doesn't matter, right? It's just a direction to move towards. What's funny is we made a lot of progress on this thing. So now when I meet some squads and I show them this, they're like laughing. Like, what did we think that was fast 2 years ago? This seems kind of slow now, right? So some squads have gone way beyond this, while some squads are still struggling to get to here. So it varies. But it's been very helpful to articulate what would awesome look like, right? We also experiment a lot with various forms of visualization. This is what we call the health check model. We haven't standardized on this, but some tribes use it. And it's basically a workshop technique where you get a squad into a room and you take a deck of cards. And each deck contains some aspect of awesomeness, okay? Such as easy to release. And then we have an example of awesome. Releasing is simple, safe, painless, and mostly automated. And an example of horrible. Releasing is risky, painful, lots of manual work, it takes forever, right? Here's an example of fun. We love going to work and have great fun working together. Example of horrible, boring, right? So easy to release, fun, delivering value, learning, speed, how much support are we getting? Just like a 360 view on how good is our work environment. And we do a workshop on that, and the outcome is pretty much a chart like that for each squad. Green means this is awesome, red means it's horrible, yellow means somewhere in between, right? And the arrows are the trends. Is it getting better, is it getting worse? So this is a whole tribe. You see any interesting patterns? What are you seeing?
Getting better.
Generally getting better. Almost every arrow is up, except for like 2. So that's a good sign. The continuous improvement engine is working, right? Good. Any other patterns? What? Yeah, look at the code base seems to be in trouble here. It's getting better for most, but there are 2 squads here where it's red and not getting better. So that's like, okay, we have some systemic issue here. Any other patterns? Having fun. Yeah, look at that. All green, right? And getting better. Maybe they're having too much fun, right? But we don't need to, look at any kind of motivational schemes here. They're having fun. That's not the issue here. But easy to release. That's another problem, right? It's hard to get stuff into production here for some reason. So there may be a systemic issue here. If that problem persists, maybe fun will get worse as well over time. Because it's not fun if you can't get stuff into production. So we'll look for systemic problems. This actually led to a big push towards continuous delivery and code quality things like test automation. By seeing that it's actually a systemic issue in the tribe, we can start looking at the common root causes, things like that. It's also interesting to compare, like Squad 2 here is having a lot of trouble, right? Squad 4 appears to be not having any trouble at all, but that might not necessarily be true, right? This doesn't give you the answers, it gives you the questions to ask, right? It turned out that Squad 4 was actually mostly new hires, and they were still in some kind of honeymoon period and not really, right? So they hadn't noticed what was not working yet. They were still blinded by what is working. But yeah, it's useful. Visualizing problems, look for systemic issues. This is just one way of doing it, but it's turned out to be quite helpful. So wrap up. This is my big takeaway so far from working at Spotify for a number of years, which is a culture beats process. Culture is more important. And culture to me is just stuff that people do without noticing it. It's easier for me to notice because I'm part-time. I'm there part-time, half-time about. But I try to help them notice it as well, just create organizational self-awareness. If you notice the good stuff and the bad stuff, you can do something about the bad stuff and strengthen the good stuff, right? But I find that culture, you can't delegate that to somebody to own culture. You can't point your finger and say you should change, right? It's kind of the only way I know is this mindset that you are the culture. The culture is the sum of everybody's behavior and attitudes, right? So start with yourself. If you want to change a culture, look at what can I change and how I act. And sometimes that'll cause ripple effects. So model the behavior you want to see. That's my big takeaway from this. And yeah, I think that's it. We're out of time, and I'll be around for questions in open space or this afternoon, or find me. Actually, there's a coffee break now, so if you have questions, you can come up here and we can have a chat, right? But thank you, everybody. Bye.